closing time. Open all the doors and let you out into the world.
Overall, it was a good session. We're pretty pleased, but tonight was a little disappointing. And I got to tell you, we this morning, all of you and all of us thought that we were this close on real, meaningful tax relief. And unfortunately, the Speaker of the House and the Senate President dropped the ball and failed to get it done.
That's Maryland Governor Larry Hogan early this morning after the legislative session wrapped up at midnight. He wasn't very happy about the fact that there's no tax relief for people in the state of Maryland, and they came close. Joining us on the line right now, Pamela Wood, who covers the Maryland General Assembly and Baltimore County for the Baltimore Sun. Pamela, thanks for joining us here on Mornings on the Mall.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
All right, so I guess you were up late last night, huh?
I sure was.
All right. Well,
Lots of action.
Thanks for rallying and making the early call here. Listen, the governor seems very frustrated. Now, as I understood it, I mean, the House had a plan and the Senate had a plan, and they just couldn't come together on it, and the governor sounds pretty disgusted about that.
That's correct. We had predicted this would come down to the wire, and it most certainly did. The House and the Senate passed different versions of a tax relief plan on multiple fronts. Both had an expansion of the earned income tax credit, which benefits the working poor. Both had individual tax relief and some corporate tax changes. But the two sides differed on a lot of the details, and about 8 o'clock last night it became clear that negotiations had broken down, and that meant nobody got anything in the end.
All right, so is there a chance that they'll come back? And I mean, I hear some sort of there's some talk about the possibility of a special session if they could work out those agreements, now behind closed doors between now and that special session.
Right. Just as soon as the session ended, one of the first things that Senate President Mike Miller suggested was coming back for a special session to address tax relief and possibly a sick leave bill that also failed in the final hours. But that's not likely. It requires 2 out of the 3, the President of the Senate, the Governor, or the House Speaker, to agree to a special session, and there's just not the urgency. The House Speaker told me last night that probably they would look at this in the interim over several months, come back in January with something everybody can agree on.
And what was the major crux of the disagreement there? Was it how much the tax cut, who gets the tax cut, how you're going to pay for the tax cut? I mean, what ended up being the biggest stumbling block here? Because Larry Hogan, Governor Hogan, in that video posted to the Baltimore Sun from last night at midnight, he seemed very angry and very, very surprised that it didn't go through.
He was. He kind of thought something would happen. He'd taken credit in the last few weeks for changing the conversation to getting lawmakers and Democrats talking about a tax cut. However, there were these ideas did come from the legislature largely, but the House negotiators told me they were firm that they wanted more for middle-income tax earners, and they felt that the Senate was giving too much to high-income earners, and they just dug their feet in, and neither side was willing to give.
Okay. And in terms of the criminal justice reforms legislation that did seem to pass, and you said that in your reporting that Governor Hogan is inclined to sign it, what major difference is that going to reflect in terms of how people are incarcerated? And will there be people who are currently in jail, in prison, who will be let out and put into drug rehab, or is it just for new offenders?
The bill is known as the Justice Reinvestment Act, and it is a sweeping reform to multiple aspects of the criminal justice system. Broadly, some of the key elements include for first-time and low-level drug offenders, it gives judges an option to sentence somebody to treatment instead of jail. So instead of 6 months in the local jail, you might get sentenced to treatment. There's a belief that maybe you can nip that kind of criminal activity in the bud, and instead of with proper treatment, instead of having people have increasingly bad crimes. There also are some elimination of mandatory minimum sentences for some of the higher drug offenses, and I believe that some people who are in now on mandatory minimums will be able to apply to have their sentence reviewed. There also are some easier steps towards getting parole, kind of a clearer process towards parole for some crimes. as well as some people who are already out on parole and probation, if they mess up, instead of landing back into prison for all of their what they call backup time that they didn't serve, they're going to have some, what they say, swift and certain sanctions. So shorter times maybe landing back in jail, but quicker, instead of sending somebody back for years and years.
And very quickly, Noah's Law did pass in the last few minutes of the session. That's a drunk driving bill named after a police officer in Montgomery County. Very quickly, what does that do?
Yes. Now, if you are pulled over as a drunk driver, if your blood alcohol is as low as 0.08, you're more likely to get an ignition interlock on your car. They have to blow into it before your car will start, and it's a major policy change.
All right. Well, listen, Pamela, again, thank you so much. I know you were up late last night. Thanks for joining us here this morning on Mornings on the Mall.